Hi everyone, I'm Sosteen. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about making the bodice to my Princess Anna costume so I could turn the skirt into a House of Worth inspired ball gown. For those of you who may not have seen the last episode, I've been working on an 1890s historical Disney princess outfit. Last week I released a video talking about the designing and making of my Princess Anna skirt. The goal of this outfit is to make a version of Princess Anna's harvest gown that she wears in Frozen 2, but in a way that recalls the decadence and sweeping romance of the 1890s and the favorite art style of that period, and my personal favorite as well, Art Nouveau. So let's just jump into studying Anna's harvest dress outfit. She wears an adorable jacket with embroidery, but if you look at what she wears underneath, she has a bodice of some sort. From the look of the concept art, it looks more like a ball gown bodice than the sort of shirt that women would wear underneath jackets, even though it does have long sleeves. I must have looked at over 200 1890s fashion plates, but I didn't find a single one of a woman wearing a jacket with a lower cut neckline underneath. Now, was it never done? Probably not. I'm sure someone did. But if you don't see it all that commonly on a portrait or a fashion plate, it most likely wasn't all that fashionable to do so. For today, let's ignore the jacket and simply focus on the bodice itself. The only tops you really find with a neckline that looks anything like the one that Anna wears are on 1890s ball gowns. The way that I personally chose to translate this outfit was to make it a ball gown with a jacket on top. Now, this is something that women, moreover princesses of the era, probably did not do for politeness reasons or so forth, but hey, it's Disney and it's a movie about magic. I care more about getting the look of the outfit right than being period accurate. Perhaps Anna was dressed for a ball at the palace, which the movie didn't happen to show, and she got a little chilly and put on a matching jacket. I don't know, it's entirely possible, and that's the story I'm going to go with. So, my plan was to make the top an 1890s ball gown bodice that matches the embroidery on the skirt. This is because ball gowns from that period had bodices that closely matched the skirt and always went with it. And if you look at the original Disney concept art as well as the gown in the final movie, you'll notice that her outfit very much resembles a ball gown from the 1890s era, with the embroidery on the bottom matching that on the bodice. With this assumption, let's talk about the bodice and what we're going to do to make it. I usually find making the bodice of a ball gown to be probably the most intimidating part to do, mostly because I'm not even sure where to begin with an 1890s bodice. There's so many different ways to make it, and yet very few patterns to tackle it. Even books like The Keystone Jacket and Dress Cutter and 1895 Manual on Sewing doesn't go into sewing an evening gown bodice. There are a few on ageless patterns, but none really had the look I was going for, and no other pattern company had anything close. Whenever I'm overwhelmed with options, I find that the best thing to do is start with looking at a ton of different extant gowns and fashion plates, and to just pick a favorite and try to draft that. So that's what I did. I scoured the Met Museum website, and I also looked through my favorite websites for fashion plates, my Janet Arnold book collections, and I just found myself drawn over and over again to this particular gown from the book House of Worth, The Birth of Haute Couture. This particular dress is currently stored at the Museum of the City of New York and was designed by Jean-Philippe Worth in the year 1905. While this is a little ahead of the time period that I'm working on, or 1898, it's still fairly similar to ball gowns of the era, so I decided to run with it. The House of Worth is a designer brand and really the first ever haute couture house. They did truly incredible and marvelous things with fabric through the decades starting in 1858 until they closed in the 1950s. They created wonderful works of art that inspired customers and fashion lovers today. So, while the House of Worth was created by Charles Frederick Worth, my favorite Worth gowns are not actually made by him, but by his son, Jean-Philippe Worth. In fact, I bet that's true for most of you. Some of the most famous gowns attributed to the House of Worth, including the peacock dress, the ironworks dress, and this one, were all made by Jean-Philippe Worth and not his father. In fact, by the time that this particular dress was made, Charles Frederick Worth had died 10 years ago, and his two sons, Jean-Philippe and his brother, Gaston Lucien, had taken over the business. Gaston Lucien doing the business side and Jean-Philippe taking over the designing portion. By that time, Jean-Philippe had been designing for the House of Worth since 1870s, impressing even his taciturn father. So, can we give a giant whoa and some credit to the son that is often not mentioned, but designed some of the best and most famous dresses to ever come out of the House of Worth. So with that background, now you know why this particular bodice is so spectacularly beautiful. Before I go into making my dream bodice, I would like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Skillshare. If you've been on my channel at all in the past, you know that I genuinely use a lot of Skillshare. I personally believe that doing 10 minutes of active learning every single day results in bettering yourself considerably over time. The best part is that each class has been broken down into a series of smaller pieces, each about 5 to 10 minutes long. This makes it easy to try to learn just a little bit every single day. Currently, I'm taking a class by Justin Bridges called Fundamentals of Photo Editing. While I love to work with professional photographers like Lindsay Hinderer, it's been something I've always wanted to learn so that I could really do my own and take better pictures for Instagram. It's only 13 lectures, and even if I take one a day, I'll still finish the whole class under 2 weeks. But they're not just for photographers and editors, but for anyone who's really into learning new things and gathering new skills. They have a plethora of different classes so you can satiate your curiosity in a myriad of fields, be it cartooning, calligraphy, lighting your photography, cooking Indian food, or general time management. Skillshare is affordable at less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. If you're curious and want to try, I highly recommend it. The first 1,000 people to use a link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership so you can explore your creativity. So now let's talk about making this bodice by Jean-Philippe Worth a reality. I loved the asymmetry of this dress, and in particular loved how easy it would be to translate this top for my Art Nouveau design. So to make this gown, I decided to start by making the inner structure itself and then figuring out how to make the wrapping portions on top of it. But I need to make this inner structure. As many of you know, I usually draft my own clothing on my Beatrice dress form, which is a dress form that has a foam cord cut to be shaped like my body, based on a 3D scan of my actual body done with a cell phone. Now, while I do have an 1890s corset, I do not have a dress form that is designed for that shape. However, since I do have an 1880s dress form, I decided to use that shape instead. The S-bend corset, which gave the body a slightly different shape, was around at this time, but they weren't ubiquitous at this stage, unlike the 1900s, which is why I decided that it was in fact totally okay to wear my 1880s corset for this look. With this in mind, I started with a pattern I did have, the truly Victorian 1886 ball gown bodice. The cool thing about this pattern is that it works very similarly to how I know 1890s Worth gowns were made, which is they also have a highly structured core in the center with pieces of silk draped on top of it. So I took this slightly early pattern and started there by cutting out the lining pieces for the bodice in my size and cutting the pieces out in a coutil I had in the house. I sewed this together and put it on my dress form. There are several things about an 1890s ball gown that are very distinct from an 1880s ball gown. Yes, they're both low cut, but an 1890s ball gown bodice tends to stop at the waist rather than stop 2 to 4 inches below that waist, and generally they have a slightly different shape to the bodice, a little bit more pigeon-breasted. Please note that my plan at this point was to still have the dress be back closing. While my 1880s bodice is slightly early, it's an easy fix to make it appropriate to the 1890s. I first took off the straps and shaped the bust to the same size and shape as the Worth gown I was copying, and also shortened the bottom to make it stop at the natural waist and give it that gentle point in the front, rather than the lower and more dramatic 1880s point. I think I mentioned that this original bodice was made out of coutil. Honestly, not knowing how 1890s bodices were actually made, I was planning on constructing mine entirely out of coutil, which is a very stiff fabric and is often used for corsets. This is where my friend and fellow costumer Abby Cox came to the rescue. I'm sure you're all familiar with her channel where she looks at old clothing and teaches you how they did it. But she also sews beautiful, inspiring clothing, all the while being utterly hilarious and witty. She actually owns an actual designer bodice from this era. With her usual enthusiasm, she was kind enough to walk me through the construction of her copy.
Okay, shaky handheld phone camera time, but since I'm in my collection playing around like I am a curator or something, I decided to pull this out. So this isn't late 90s, it is 89. I wanted to show you how they did it and how it looks on the inside, because it's actually pretty similar to how the Worth one looks. So the lining is silk, every seam is boned, but it is actually center front closing. So a lot of people like to think that evening gowns were back closing. Actually, a lot of them were center front closing. So it's center front closing with hooks and eyes. And then it has a bit of a drawstring here at the neck to gather it in. But this is how they did the gorgeous net. And then it's folded over like so. And so this would have hooked over, and it is roughly roughly tacked on the inside. And this is couture, so just like, oh, couture's nice. No, it's not. It's still janky on the inside. And then this actually just kind of seems to have hung open, like so. And then, yeah, like the sleeves are just tacked on the inside. So you'll be fine. Don't try to make it too nice. Like, you don't have to. Like, they don't.
It was at this point while I was drafting that I consulted Abby. Once I found out about the fact that these gowns are in fact front closing, I jumped at the opportunity to be able to dress myself like a grown woman. I seamed the back shut and cut the front open so that I could in fact make it front closing. Once I had this, I started drafting the pretty draping pieces to go on top. I did this by pinning the muslin to the base and then drawing the pieces onto it. I marked how big I wanted the embroidery to be as well as what direction. I did this for the two pieces in the front as well as the back pieces. The pattern pieces are not on the grain but are on the bias. This is on purpose so that the dress pieces can sort of be steamed and pulled to fit around the curve of the bodice without having to put in any darts. As you'll notice, Worth gowns do not have darts. Now, Abby was kind enough to also teach me about the lining of these gowns. They tended to be unlined really, with a silk taffeta base with lots of boning added to give shape rather than using thick fabric to begin with. So I cut up my coutil to use as a pattern and used that on my ivory silk taffeta purchased from Silk Baron to cut out the pattern pieces. I added a 1/2-inch seam allowance on all sides since the mock-up I did not have a seam allowance on the top or the bottom. Random aside, when I'm making a mock-up, I often do not add seam allowances on the top or the bottom so that it's really easy for me to see how the shape looks, especially when I try it on or put it on my dress form. It's so much easier to visualize the neckline as well as the bottom edge when you don't have to imagine how it would look without the seam allowance. So now the silk taffeta was cut, I then sewed it all up. To add the boning channels, I got white cotton double folded bias tape, which I like to keep in the house at all times, and then cut it out to the length at each seam, numbering them as I went. So I start with a 0 at the center back seam, and then each one was 1, 2, and 3 from there. I then sewed the bias tape 7 millimeters away from the center fold to make a channel 6 millimeters wide in order to fit my 6 millimeter wide synthetic whalebone, which I then slid into each channel. I then folded over the top and bottom edges of the boning channels, and then I machine sewed these to the bodice with one simple seam at each seam line of the bodice. You'll probably notice that this seam layer goes through all the layers and thus would be visible from the right side of the silk taffeta. This did not bother me all that much since I knew that this would be covered up by the embroidery panels. Afterwards, I folded over the front edge of the bodice and sewed a channel in the silk taffeta for the center front. I put in the boning for there too, and sewed the top and the bottom shut to enclose this boning within. I also folded over the seam allowance at the top and the bottom of the bodice and machine sewed this all the way around. Not the most elegant looking work, to be honest, but this is all structural, and as long as the shape is correct, I really don't care about the perfection of the details on the inside, and completely honestly, neither does Worth. The insides are quite messy.
Don't try to make it too nice, like you don't have to. Like they don't.
So once this was done, I put in the hooks and eyes to fasten it shut. I put this on my dress form to make sure that it fit properly, and I also put on my own corset and made sure that it fit me. I didn't film this, and I could say that this was due to modesty, but really it was due to laziness because I didn't feel like it, so sorry. Meanwhile, I scanned in the pattern pieces for the bodice and put them together on my computer using Adobe Photoshop. I put this onto my embroidery digitizing software and loaded it up. I made sure that the rulers fit with the guidelines that I had used for the pattern that I had drawn in on previously. I then pulled up the straight and curved embroidery design that I had designed for the skirt. I put it onto the pattern pieces and played with the sizing. I did shrink it down a bit in order to fit with how I wanted it to look, but completely honestly, I quickly realized I had to make up some whiplash curves if I wanted to fit the same shape of the bust. So I got my curved shape drawing tool on palette 11 and made some Art Nouveau looking lines to fit in with the curvature of the neckline in the front and the back. I actually didn't have to fray check this or do anything else to keep the fabric from fraying. The embroidery stitches do a great job of keeping the fabric from unraveling at the edges, so you can use just the edge of the embroidery. And a close, careful snip using tiny embroidery scissors will do the job well. I just put on a documentary and happily watched and sewed to make this dull task more fun. After that, I pinned the first finished piece onto the dress form. Honestly, I was thrilled. Whenever I work on a bodice, especially one where there is no extent for me to follow precisely and one where I really make up a lot, I worry about what looks good in my head won't look good when actually sewn out. But when I first put the piece onto the bodice, I really loved it and realized that my plan would actually work. I did a little dance and put the photos on Instagram and went back to work. Now, if you look at the original Worth gown, it has some beautiful lace underneath. Jean-Philippe has a particular gift from knowing when to use lace on a dress to perfection. Now, while I'm not making my own lace by hand like Enchanted Rose did, I did get out some beautiful lace that I had in my personal collection. It's machine stitched but a beautiful vintage piece I bought on a whim about a year ago from an Etsy store called From Lace with Love, and I was so happy to find a good use for it. I put that around the bodice, pinning it in place and checking it out. To hide the front closure, I used a piece of silk taffeta in a wrap-like fashion. First, I got the taffeta bit and covered it with lace. After I figured out where I wanted the lace to go, I stitched all the lace on by hand using tiny back stitches. I also realized I had cut out too much of the back, so I sewed in a silk taffeta panel by hand to close it up and covered that part with lace too. Once all the lace and the flaps were on, I then sewed in the silk embroidered panels for the dress, starting with the ones in the front and then doing the ones in the back. I simply folded over the seam allowance and then using a tiny spaced back stitch, I stitched all the way around the sides as well as the bottom as well as the top. And then for the embroidery portions, I actually used ivory silk thread stitched really close to the actual embroidery so that it would be nigh invisible next to it. Once that was done, I used 2 hooks and eyes to sew in the closure for the wrap front. I want to add that the first time I sewed the hooks and eyes in, I totally put them in the wrong place because I just guesstimated using a table. When I actually put it on my dress form, I could see that where I put it was completely off by about 2 inches. So I took those hooks and eyes out and put it in properly. So the moral of this is don't be me. Definitely put it on your dress form to figure out where you want the hooks and eyes to go. While I was putting the lace around the top of the bodice, I imagined how marvelous the lace might look as a delicate little sleeve. I love that idea, so I ran with it. So I cut two 17-inch pieces for the sleeve, doing a French seam halfway up to make the actual sleeve. Once that was done, I tucked the two raw edges under the embroidery to make it look like it was seamed on, and I witch stitched that in after the rest of the gown was finished. I initially planned on making an Art Nouveau strap, and in fact, digitized and stitched out two of them. However, once I put it on my dress form, I really hated the way it looked. It just made it so tacky. So I removed them and decided to go with just the lace. And now the bodice was done. Time for another quick get ready with me? If this weren't an Anna costume but simply making a Worth ball gown, I think this journey would be completely done. However, as I really want to embody Princess Anna wearing her harvest dress, I will be releasing one more video in this series coming this Sunday, explaining how I made her jacket as well as giving the final reveal. Thanks for joining me, everyone, and please remember to subscribe and click the bell.